Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned for Roger's Random Book Show. It's Roger's Random Book Show once again, the ever entertaining program where Roger just wanders around the manor and finds some random books lying around, and then we talk about those books. He takes time out of his busy schedule, when he's usually strangling people to choose some books for us to talk about. So let's talk about these random books that Roger picked up with his bloody dead fingers. Okay. The first book that we're going to be talking about today is actually several books. It's this, and what the heck is this? It is actually The Three Musketeers. Yes, this is the classic The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. There he is there. This is the Easton Press edition of The Three Musketeers, part of their 100 greatest books ever written. This is one of the 100 greatest books ever written, according to Easton Press. Their 100 greatest books ever written line is over 100 books long. I guess they can't count, but they know a good book when they see one, usually, and this is certainly one of them. This is my favorite Alexandre Dumas novel. I love it. I love The Three Musketeers. And I know it's not considered his greatest work. That's probably The Count of Monte Cristo, but this is my favorite. And I only have it in physical form in this fancy pants copy, which I took off of my shelf back there. It's an old-timey translation. It's so old-timey that I don't know who translated it. This edition is a reprint of the Limited Editions Club, which was published in 1950. And it's pretty cool. It's got all these cool old illustrations. So it's kind of awesome. It's all double columned because this is actually a very long book. It was a serialized story, like most, if not all, of Dumas' stories were. Serialized in various newspapers. And it's fantastic. I love it. This is just such a great book. And I enjoy this translation, even though I don't know who did it. There are newer translations out now, and I hear there are a lot of really good translations out now. This being so old, I think I heard that they cut out certain parts of this story for being too risque. But I don't know how extensive that was. And I do have at least one other translation. I have the Oxford translation, but only on as an ebook. I only have that as an ebook. As far as physical books, I think this is my only copy of The Three Musketeers right now. But it's an awful nice one. But of course, the story did not end here. Although this usually, nowadays, is the only book of the series that people read. I think very few people continue on with the Three Musketeers story. But it only started here with Three Musketeers. It continued. And for all of the rest of these, I have all of these as Oxford editions, which I bought probably in the late 90s. And the next one in the series is this one. This is 20 years after. And I did get this in the 90s, and already this book is definitely showing its age. You know, the paper from the 90s, I tell you, never lasts. And it looks like it's 100 years old, but not quite that old. Although this is 20 years after. It took place 20 years after the story did, after The Three Musketeers. And we catch up with our heroes from The Three Musketeers as middle-aged people. And there they all are on the cover, being middle-aged. I read this shortly after I bought the book, which means I read this a long, long time ago. I remember liking it, although it had a different feel to the first book, to be sure, from what I remember. It seemed, from what I remember, to be taking itself a little more seriously. Although I don't know if I'm just remembering that wrong, because it's been so long since I've read this book. And I went through these. when I was going through some of my books back in the vault, and I thought I really need to read these again. I don't know when I will, but I really need to because it's been forever. So this is the second one, 20 years after. I don't know how often this book is read. Oxford has an edition of it. I don't know that Penguin does. I don't know who else does have this in print. Dover might have one, but Oxford is the one I know that the Oxford has the whole series in print, so that's good. At least they did have them all in print the last time I checked. And it's worth reading if you like the Three Musketeers, and why wouldn't you? You definitely would want to, I would think, continue on with the story, and that story continues in 20 years after. But it continues on after that in 3 books, which are usually whittled down to 1 book. The next book in the series, now I cannot pronounce French words or names, so this is going to be difficult, but this is the Vicomte de Bragelonne. Let's just say that that's what this story is. The next story in the series is this one. And as it says here, it opens up an epic adventure which continues in the next couple books. So this is the next one in the Three Musketeers saga. It continues in this book, Louise de la Villers. See, I can speak French just fine, Roger. This is the next book in the series, which you've probably never heard of at all. And very few people have, and fewer people have read it. But here it is. It's out there, published by Oxford, at least it was. This one you've probably heard of. They've made movies off this one and everything. This is the concluding book in the series. At least I believe it's the concluding book in the series. It's the last one that I know about. The Man in the Iron Mask. This one they've made movies about and all kinds of things. So this is the end of the Three Musketeers saga right here. And you've probably heard more about this one, if you've heard about any of the sequels at all. You've probably heard about this one more than you've heard about 20 years after the others. The Man in the Iron Mask. And Oxford prints it. And unlike my copy of the Three Musketeers, I believe this actually tells you the translator. Of course, now I'm looking and I can't see it. It's edited with an introduction and notes by David Coward, but I'm not seeing the translator here. Oh well, maybe it's just Roger translated it probably. You're kind of a scholar. But this is the end, and like I said, I haven't read any of these in over 25 years, so I really need to get back to them. But they all tend to be very long. This whole series, it's kind of a long series to get through. And I am doing the 500 book challenge right now. So it would be a challenge to read these at this particular time, especially since there's some other things that I do want to get to. But we'll see. Okay, more random books. You know, every time I do one of these shows, I have to talk about something Robert E. Howard, since he is my favorite writer of all time. And a couple weeks ago when I did this show, I pulled out a book with some Breckinridge Elkins stories on it. So I thought I should pull this out. This is A Gent from Bear Creek, which ended up being the first published book of Robert E. Howard. The first time he was published in a book all of his own outside of the magazines was a book called A Gent from Bear Creek, which was published posthumously, if I'm remembering right. I think that's the case. What he did is he took, I think, 9 Breckinridge Elkins stories that were published originally in Action Stories, I think, and changed them up just a little bit to make a fix-up novel. Fix-up novels became very popular later on, especially in science fiction, where writers would take the stories that they had published in science fiction magazines, fix them up so they would work more or less as a novel and could be published in paperbacks and hardcover. And that's what happened with this. So this is a series of stories featuring Breckinridge Elkins, the grizzled mountain man, the incredibly strong but not very bright mountain man. And these stories fully display Robert E. Howard's sense of humor. They're tall tales. And it's in a style of writing you just don't get too much anymore, the tall tale. But that's what these are. These are westerns, they're adventures, they're humorous adventures that tell basically tall tales. And they're very entertaining. And this is a very entertaining book. And it has a great Jeff Jones cover. And since it's a zebra book that was published in the 70s, you have to have the cigarette ad, in the center. I'd heard enough to make me decide one of two things: quit or smoke true. I smoke true. You probably should have quit. This guy's probably dead now because he smoked cigarettes. So yeah, you've got the cigarette ad in the middle of your book, as was common back at this time. So yeah, A Gent from Bear Creek. If you ever see this lying around, pick it up. It's tremendously entertaining. The Robert E. Howard Foundation Press, though, very, very soon is going to be reprinting the Breckinridge Elkins stories in a series of books, I believe. I can't remember how many they originally published in hardcover. I think it was 2 or 3 volumes of the Breckinridge Elkins stories. I can't remember. Might have been 2. But they are going to be reprinting those. So keep an eye out for those, because then you will have really nice complete editions of those stories. But if you ever see this lying around, pick it up because it's awesome. So that was Robert E. Howard. So now to get to some things that are not so random, because in a couple days, very soon it will be May, which means horror mayhem is on the horizon. And I did a whole video about horror mayhem and the things I want to read for horror mayhem. But of course, I'm always poking around here at the manor, and Roger, with his grubby, bloody fingers, picked up some of my books from the vault, including these next ones, which I think would be kind of appropriate for horror mayhem. And since we just talked about Robert E. Howard, we have to talk about H.P. Lovecraft for a second. But this is not a book of H.P. Lovecraft. This is H.P. Lovecraft's favorite weird tales. H.P. Lovecraft's favorite weird tales. Discover the roots of modern horror. That's a Daniel Gover cover there with H.P. Lovecraft and friend hanging out in the library. So this is edited by Douglas A. Anderson. There were a couple different books that claimed to have his favorite stories in them, and they did both include a lot of his favorite stories. And this one is interesting. H.P. Lovecraft's favorite weird tales. And I read this once after I got it, which had to be early 2000s. When did I get this? Because I got this new. And I got this, looks like 2005. It looks like this came out in 2005. And the contents are divided up. The literary weird tale and the popular weird tale. The popular weird tale probably being stories that H.P. Lovecraft read in the pulps, although that seems a pretty artificial distinction, trying to say one is literary and one is popular. I mean, they're all really good weird tales, all good horror stories, and they are very much the stories you would expect to be in this volume. You've got The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. Ambrose Bierce makes 2 appearances in here: The Suitable Surroundings and The Death of Halpin Fraser. We've got some Arthur Machen in here, the novel of The Black Seal and the novel of The White Powder. Both are excellent. Those are both part of the 3 Impostors. The Yellow Sign is in here by Robert W. Chambers. Count Magnus by M.R. James. The White People is also in here by Arthur Machen. And The White People is one of Arthur Machen's greatest stories. So it's good to see it in this volume. Definitely appropriate for horror mayhem. This has The Willows by Algernon Blackwood, because if you're just going to have one Algernon Blackwood story, it usually ends up being The Willows, which H.P. Lovecraft did think was the best weird tale ever published. So it makes sense that would be the one. We've got The House of Sounds by M.P. Shiel, which is cool that that's in here. that's a cool story, and you don't see it all that often. One thing that's cool about this is that this does have the original version of the Moon Pool. The Moon Pool later became a novel. It was expanded into a novel, but it started off as a story. And H.P. Lovecraft felt that the original version was superior. Just the short story version was superior. He could have been onto something there. So we've got that. We've got Seaton's Aunt by Walter de la Mare. And in the popular Weird Tale, we have some stories that are less often anthologized. We've got Beyond the Door by Paul Sutter, The Floor Above by M.L. Humphreys, The Night Wire by H.F. Arnold, which is dynamite. If you've never read that story, you should. It's available for free online. We've got The Canal by Everett Worrell, Bells of Oceana by Arthur J. Burks, and In a Munzen's Tent. I just cannot speak. In a Munzen's Tent by John Martin Leahy. And that was it. So this is a really good book for horror mayhem. If you ever find this lying around, pick it up. It's got some cool stuff in it. The really cool thing is the Moon Pool that's in here, the original version. So that's pretty cool to have. Also, I picked up these things, which I feel like I should have read by now. And so I'm glad you picked these up, Roger. I probably will pick at least one of the two of these up for Horror Mayhem this year. I'm behind on this. So these are from the Occult Detective magazine. These are Mythos specials. So Occult Detective magazine, they don't apparently usually print too many mythos stories that are very much influenced by H.P. Lovecraft's fiction. But they did, every year I guess now, at least for the last couple of years, they've done a mythos special where they will publish that stuff. And this is the one that came out in 2023, which I still haven't gotten to yet, and I really need to. So this has a bunch of cool stories and artwork in it. So this is an Occult Detective magazine's special. This is from 2023, and I also have the one from last year, the 2024. I'm assuming they will probably come out with a 2025 one, I'm hoping, but we'll see. I haven't heard for sure. But I definitely still need to get to these two. And so this would be a good month to do that. You know, who knows what I'm actually going to get to with all the stuff that I've pulled out. And I pulled out this thing because I saw those stories by Ambrose Bierce, and it got me thinking about Ambrose Bierce and how this is a writer that not too many people talk about anymore, and I don't think people read this writer too much anymore. Ambrose Bierce. And even at the time that this was printed, this is the big collected writings of Ambrose Bierce. It looks like a modern library giant, but it isn't. It isn't that, although it looks and feels like that. This is actually published by the Citadel Press in New York. And this edition is from 1957. It reprints the 1946 edition. And this is awesome because it's full of the writings of Ambrose Bierce, who is an almost legendary figure now. He was a newspaperman who disappeared in Mexico very mysteriously. So look up this writer. He's got an interesting story, but he was an excellent writer. And he wrote great stories. He wrote stories about war. He also wrote tall tales, much like H.P. Lovecraft did. Robert E. Howard did in the Breckenridge Elkin stories, although quite different ones. But he also wrote, and this is what makes this very appropriate for Horror Mayhem, is he also wrote horror stories. It was the mailman. The mailman dared to come and deliver the mail. How dare he, Rhonda? My goodness, delivering the mail. Where was I? I was interrupted by the mailman and dogs. So yes, he wrote horror stories, which were great. And this has his collection of horror stories, as well as a lot of other cool stuff. So the collection of horror stories in here is Can Such Things Be? And if you ever see a copy of that lying around, or any kind of collection that contains it, pick it up. I think that is something that you can get probably from Project Gutenberg, almost certainly. I haven't checked, but I'm almost certain you can. And it's full of great stories, like the death of Halpin Fraser, the Moonlit Road, an inhabitant of Carcosa. It's just full of awesome stuff. The Damned Thing is in here. But also in this book, you have a bunch of other stuff. You've got the Devil's Dictionary, which is probably most famous for now is that. You've got In the Midst of Life, Tales of Soldiers and Civilians, which is a great book. That is excellent all on its own. The Monk and the Hangman's Daughter, Negligible Tales, The Parenticide Club. This is full of awesomeness. And on the back, it has little blurbs trying to get you to buy this awesome book. And one of these is from the Philadelphia Inquirer from William Targ. And it says, Ambrose Bierce, the almost forgotten man of American letters, achieves his long overdue resurrection with the publication of his best works in a new and eminently satisfactory one-volume edition. And it is awesome. And if he was forgotten then, back in the 40s when this was originally published, he seems to be really forgotten now by the general public. There is a Library of America volume that's pretty good. That's edited by S.T. Joshi. So you have that. That's good. But nothing of this quality, I believe, because this has so much in it. I wish this would just be reprinted again. That would be nice. This is awesome. So I've gone on a lot about that. But now I have to talk about comic books. I know I've gone on for a half an hour almost, but I have to talk about comic books. And since it is almost horror mayhem, I have to talk about horror comic books. And the horror comic books I'm going to be talking about right here, right now, are the Warren magazines, the black and white Warren magazines that came out in the late 60s and into the 1970s. Creepy and eerie being the greatest. So Dark Horse Comics has republished these old creepy and eerie magazines in these wonderful archive editions. This is the only one I have in hardcover, but I have quite a few of these. These are awesome. I have very fond memories of my original battered old issues of Creepy and Eerie, which I got used whenever I could find them. And usually they were just all torn up and beat up. Because this is a series that ran from the 60s until the early 80s. They ran a long time. And they died out, I believe. I believe in the early 80s. But the earlier issues were just fantastic. And I was never able to read all of those because I could never find them all. But they had great cover art by Frank Frazetta. And this series of archive editions reproduces those great Frank Frazetta covers. These are great and awesome. And when these came out in the late 60s, it was it felt almost like a return of the great EC comic books. You had a lot of the same writers. You had a lot of same artists who showed up from EC Comics. You have Archie Goodwin doing a lot of the stories and the editor of these magazines originally. He did leave. I think Warren lost some money, or for whatever reason, they couldn't afford to keep Archie Goodwin around. And when he left, a lot of the artists left. So you had this dark period where the quality just plummeted on Creepy and Eerie. It wasn't completely awful or anything like that, but man, you could really tell. And it took a while for the quality to get back up to what it was. But these are just awesome. You have the first issue looked like this with the Jack Davis cover. Pretty sure that's Jack Davis. And that's the very first issue of Creepy. And it was awesome. You had just wonderful, great horror stories and science fiction stories in it. All in glorious black and white. which works very, very well for horror comics. And this story even has interior artwork by Frank Frazetta. I think this is the only story where Frank Frazetta did the artwork on the inside of the book, as well as the cover. So that's pretty cool. I mean, you just get a lot of just awesome, awesome stuff. The quality of these stories was great. They're tremendous fun. And this was the first one. This has the first 5 issues. And then this is volume 2, another Frank Frazetta covers. I think these all have Frank Frazetta covers, actually, because he did the best covers. Although all the covers are reproduced inside the book, of course, because this reproduces everything from the magazine, including the advertisements. You get some cool advertisements in here, too. You know, for old records, old books, and it's just really cool. These are awesome. This is volume 3, collecting 11 through 15, and this cover, a version of this actually became a mass market cover to King Kong, a mass market film adaptation of King Kong had a Frank Frazetta cover that wasn't this, but it looked a lot like this. So yeah, you have the Giant Ape cover here. Then you have volume 4 with creepy 16 to 20. And this was a little thinner because this is the period when they lost Archie Goodwin, I believe. And so they were reprinting some stories. So I think this doesn't have all of the reprinted stories, which makes it a little thinner. I think that's the reason. We've got volume 5, creepy 21 to 25. This is not a house I wouldn't want to live in. It seems a little bit precarious, but it's a cool cover for creepy. Then we've got volume 6, number 26 to 32, and that's just an awesome cover. I mean, just look at that. That's fantastic. Yeah, these are just awesome. Awesome old stories. Yeah, they're great. Full of great stuff. And because it was so popular, it got a companion magazine, Eerie. This has the first 5 issues of Eerie. Again, Frank Frazetta cover for this. Volume 2 has 6 to 10. Look at that. That is cool. That is cool. And one of my favorites, which is a very Lovecraftian kind of thing, volume 3, 11 to 15 here. That's really cool. These are just gorgeous books, full of great stuff. Old-timey black and white stories. I cannot really recommend these enough. They're just wonderful. Yeah, so creepy and eerie. Perfect for horror mayhem if you happen to find any of these lying around. There's a lot more of them out now. These are the only ones that I actually have because there was this whole 500 book challenge that happened, and a lot of comic books and graphic novels are included in that. So I couldn't keep buying these, which kind of sucks, but the ones I have I like a lot, and they're very appropriate for horror mayhem. And I will shut up now because I've just gone on and on and on. Okay, guys, I will catch you next time.